Hi there, everybody. My name is Madz. I run a ministry in South Africa called Edify, and I'm going to be sharing with you today some insights that I've gained for a strategic approach on how we can empower local churches with a spectrum of counseling resources for self-care, community care, and pastoral care. Now, we know that experts are naming the ripple effects from COVID as an emotional tsunami. Studies also show us that whenever our needs for security, connection, or control are threatened, it will trigger emotions such as fear, anxiety, and anger. And we know that COVID has been such a threat. It has threatened our job security, financial security. It's threatened our relational connections. It's taken away aspects of control, choices that we used to freely make. And so we're seeing these kind of emotions exploding everywhere. Added to that, we know that whenever a storm hits, it has the capacity to reveal the strength or stability of a foundation. And for many, cracks are appearing in their faith, in their character, in their behavior, which is just adding to more complex emotions in the wake of this pandemic. Now, in the midst of all of these, we are so aware that people are in desperate need for a message of hope. They are in need of an anchor for stability as they continue to ride out the ripple effects of the storm. For me, however, a more frightening reality that I'm seeing is the fact that the increasing needs are far outweighing the available resources. In fact, this was a reality that I saw pre-COVID. I want to just give you some background to my journey to understanding this dilemma. In 2007, I was employed as a pastoral counselor for a local church in Durban, South Africa. It was a fast-growing church, and I realized very quickly that one person can only see so many people, and that I needed to invest in resources, train up a team of volunteer counselors to help me cope with the load. However, despite me running this course annually, I eventually grew the team to over 100 volunteer counselors, seeing on average 80 to 90 people a week. Yet in the 14 years that I ran Grace Counseling, there was never a day where there was no one on the waiting list. You see, people were sharing the good news that they were receiving help. And for every one person that got help, they told 4 or 5 others. And so this is where I started to realize the importance of empowering more and more churches with resources. Now, an interesting statistic that I saw over the years was the change in who came for counseling. In the early days, about 50% were members of my own church. About 40% were members of other churches because they never had counseling resources, so they started sending them to us. And about 10% of people that came to us were unchurched. But as I started to empower other local churches with counseling resources, training up their teams, we started to see the stats change. About 40% were members from our church, about 10% came from other churches, but about 50% were unchurched. Counseling was missional, and this is where I started to get really excited. And this was actually the drive behind me taking my training nationally and hopefully internationally. You see, imagine if every local church could offer their community some level of pastoral care and support, especially now in the wake of this global pandemic. Now is the time more than ever for local churches to become intentional in their approach. Here's one of the reasons why. When you look at the 4 psychological response phases to any disaster, we can see actually that the majority of the world right now are stuck in the 3rd phase. So to give you a quick overview, the first phase is known as the heroic phase. It's the space where people jump in to help without thinking. And generally it lasts a couple of hours, maybe even a few days. Then we go into the honeymoon phase. It's where communities come together to pool resources as a way of trying to impact those most affected by the initial disaster. We saw this happening in the early stage of COVID. Communities gathering food parcels and making masks or whatever it was. There was this real kind of coming together to stand in solidarity as we saw the impact of COVID worldwide. But slowly, people started to shift into what is known as the disillusionment phase, where people started to realize that their continued assistance was not sustainable. Because as the needs continued to increase, resources slowly started decreasing. It's the same concept as you can give a man a fish and you deal with his hunger in the moment. But if you teach a man to fish, you deal with his hunger long term. But as people started to kind of feel the sense of my needs are not being met, it started triggering all these emotions like anger because of abandonment, and those that were trying their best to meet the needs started to feel a sense of guilt as they were failing, and it led to despair and apathy. Interesting enough, about 50% of those that I'm counseling currently are pastors and counselors who are feeling fatigue and burnout. Now, studies show us that it's generally around the anniversary of a disaster where we start to slowly shift into the fourth phase. The fourth phase is known as the reconstruction phase. It's when people start to realize that the only way to move forward to a place of thriving is when we start to take self-ownership, when we start to rebuild and adjust to our new normal. We have to take ownership of our recovery journey. And if churches and helping kind of professions are going to sustain, they have to learn to start to become strategic by giving people tools. We've got to give them tools to help them readjust, to rebuild on solid foundations, to help them readapt to this new normal because it's not going away. So we know that counseling is missional. And so it's an incredible opportunity that the church can kind of, in a sense, grab so that they can become more impactful in this time. Now, over the years, as I've observed strategically the impact that counseling can have on churches and communities, here are some of the things that I've learned along the way. God kind of gave me a clear picture for this as what I call the 3 C's: community, church, and counseling. Now, we know that generally a local community will turn to a church when it's either in a spiritual or an emotional crisis. We also know that local churches really want to impact their communities, but often fail when it comes to emotional crises because of a couple of reasons. First of all, they may have a pastoral counselor on staff, but generally that person is excellent at counseling, but not so good at training or team development. And this is why, as the demands increase, those counselors tend to burn out because they don't know how to invest in developing team and support structures around them. Another thing that I've seen is that senior pastors often find themselves in the space by nature of their title where they're having to counsel, but it's not really their gifting. You see, they're visionary leaders, they're eyes, they know that they don't always make good ears. And so they too end up burning out, or they just avoid emotional topics altogether. This is where I believe counseling becomes an incredible resource to churches and communities. One, it eliminates the pressure off of those individuals who are trying to carry the load. Because as number two, it empowers mature believers with skills. That individual now has a team to support them. Plus, it also equips people with self-care tools for owning their own emotional crisis. So you can see there's really a spectrum of resources when it comes to counseling. Now, we know, for example, if we look at it from a physical health perspective, everyone knows the importance of dealing with a flesh wound. We know what it means to disinfect a wound or to kind of dress it well to prevent further infection. We know that we can access a spectrum of help from over-the-counter medication to chatting to your pharmacist or your GP if you're concerned, and potentially having to see a surgeon, especially if you don't deal with that wound. We know that it can lead to serious infection that may even need surgery. Now, the same applies to emotional and mental health. We know that if we don't deal with anger in its minor state, it can lead to a chronic depression. We know that if mild anxiety can lead to panic attacks if it's not processed well. What many don't realize is that there's also a spectrum of resources that we can invest in, even for our emotional and spiritual well-being. It has been said that when it comes to mental health, from first symptom to actual treatment, most will wait 11 years before getting help. To me, this is incredibly sad. It kind of speaks of the fact that people don't realize the tools and the resources that are actually available for them. Now, scripture actually gives us a very clear picture of the spectrum of help that can actually be accessed. That there was actually a character in scripture who found himself in a very similar scenario to what we're in today. In Exodus 18, we see that Moses is finding himself in a space where he is trying to attend to the needs of the people around him. And scripture says in verse 13 that from morning to evening, he was trying to help. And his father-in-law steps into the space in verse 18, and he kind of challenges him. He says to him, "Why are you doing this alone?" And Moses kind of says, "Well, you know what, the needs are massive and I have to try and help. So, I've kind of set up camp from morning to evening to try and kind of address all of these needs." And Jethro in verse 17 and 18 says, he kind of challenges his approach, saying, "It's not good. You're going to wear yourself out. It's not sustainable." Does it sound familiar? Then in verses 19 to 23, Jethro gives the most incredible three-leveled strategic approach to the spectrum of help that Moses needed to kind of invest in. And in a sense, it's the same resource and tools that we need to invest in today. So listen to this. This is the first level. It's called self-care. Verse 20. Teach them their decrees and instructions. Show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. In other words, Jethro was saying to Moses, you know what? Give people tools for life. Teach them these tools. These tools are what I call tools of truth or vitamin wisdom. It's for self-care. It's for everyday living. You see, when we do this, we help people lay solid identity foundations that can sustain them through a storm. It's no different to the importance of teaching the people the importance of disinfecting a wound or just washing your hands. The second level is what I call community care. Listen to verse 21. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times. In other words, select mature believers from among you with skills for dealing with minor issues that people can't deal with themselves. Think about it. This is the heart of what discipleship is all about. In Ephesians 4, we actually hear a very similar mandate given. It talks about how God's people who have been equipped are to build up the body of Christ. Some translations use the word, instead of build up, they use the word edify. It's the Greek word for edify is oikodomi, which means the act of one who promotes another's growth in Christian wisdom, piety, happiness, and holiness. It's where I got the name for my ministry, about equipping people with tools so that they can build up each other. When you think about it, this is actually the role of small group leaders. Technically, they are the community carers, as they are the ones who are at the forefront of people's stories. The problem is they generally don't know what to do with the story. I'm going to speak about that more intentionally just now. But the third level that Jethro speaks into is what I call pastoral care. Listen to verse 22. But have them bring the very difficult cases to you. The simple cases they can decide for themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. You see, if you do this, and as God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. See, Jethro makes it very clear that there is a distinction between minor issues and major ones, simple cases versus more difficult ones, that there is a spectrum of needs that we can invest in, but at the same time, there are different levels of skilled care. In fact, I want to add a fourth level, that there is a need for specialist professional care. You see, when we parallel this to physical health, from over-the-counter medication is the same as self-care, giving people tools to manage their own kind of insecurities or kind of triggers. Then there's the pharmacist. That's the same as community care, or a GP is like pastoral care, and a surgeon is the same as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, professional care. So as we come into land, I want to look at what does this look like practically? How can the local church apply these kind of spectrum of resources to help those that come into their fold, so that they too don't become tired like Moses? And the simple answer is to invest in the spectrum of resources, to find practical tools to give people into each of these levels. So let's look at self-care. I mean, there are heaps of amazing resources worldwide specifically designed around self-care. However, one of the biggest struggles that I've seen is this, what I call gap between a person's spirituality, in other words, knowing who I am in Christ, and their psychology. Why do I think, feel, and behave the way I do? We have to find ways to become intentional in closing that gap, giving people tools to help them better understand that when they invest in the identity foundation in Christ, how that's going to impact the way they think, feel, and behave. I actually developed an online video resource called the Wholeness course that intentionally takes people on a journey of showing them how to better understand their triggers, why they are thinking, feeling, and behaving the way they do, and how when they invest in building their identity on a firm foundation, it will have a ripple effect into the psychological aspects of themselves. And the emphasis is on the how. It's a great self-care resource, but it's also a great resource that they can do in community, because it really fosters what I call masks off conversations. So let's look at community care. Now, this is a space I believe is a real for such a time as this moment. It's a time that we need to empower small group leaders with skills. Skills not just about pressing play on a DVD as they run their small group or serving great coffee. But small group leaders are finding themselves more and more at the forefront of people's stories. And they need tools to have effective conversations, effective discipleship conversations. It really was the tipping point as Joseph saw that Moses was tired, and in a sense, he couldn't sustain the demand. And so Jethro said, you know what? Get people to kind of help you deal with the kind of the mass minor issues that are out there. Now is the time for us to raise up an army of disciples, of community carers with skills for effective masks off conversations. I developed a course called Coffee Cup Convos. It uses the parable of the wise man who built his house upon a rock. And this is the model that I use for training, because in this parable, we see that there is a storm, there is a house, and there is a foundation. And the storm reveals the strength of the house's foundations. You see, if you build your house, if you build a sandcastle on sand, it will stay standing while the sun is shining. It's only when storms hit that you start to realize the importance of building on a stable foundation. So we want to give small group leaders tools to show them what it means to have an effective discipleship conversation as they listen to people's storms, as they listen to their stories. You know, generally we want to fix the cracks in the houses. We want to use polyfiller instead of actually dealing with the foundation. And that's what true discipleship is all about. And so this course will teach these community carers on how to deal with people's stories and how to have an effective conversation. And then lastly, pastoral care. that there is an intentional way of investing in formal lay counseling, that as we invest in the space, I honestly can see the huge impact and the power of this space. This is one of the main reasons why I moved to Johannesburg, away from my hometown, to intentionally start to empower churches nationally with these kind of resources on how to start and build and maintain a thriving lay counseling ministry. Because as I've described, it's missional. It's the most incredible bridge between communities and churches. And this model of, I've actually developed what I call the Wholeness Model. It's a great framework specifically for lay counselors to use as a navigational system so they don't get lost in the complexities of people's stories. But at the same time, it empowers them to point people back to a right relationship with God as they navigate the complexities of people's stories. And then lastly, I want to speak into one of the biggest problems when it comes to professional care. Most people simply cannot afford to see a professional. We know from research that generally 1 in 10 can afford it. So that for me is just not good enough. So one of the kind of strategic approaches that I've developed is to encourage churches that offer lay counseling to request a minimal donation that's non-obligatory, that's completely anonymous, that people can just willingly give according to their own capacity. But then what we tell churches do is to take those donations and to keep it as a pool, as a fund for that 1 in 10 who can't afford it. Now you have the resources to help pay. That as you partner with Christian professionals in your local communities, you say to them, hey, often we have people that come to the church that should be seeing a professional that can't afford it, but we've invested in a small financial resource to help pay for 2 or 3 sessions with a professional where they can have an official assessment, maybe a diagnosis, and then in turn to re-partner back with the volunteer counselors. The professional can communicate with them and say, hey, I've journeyed, this is where we're at, this is how you can continue to help this person because we know they can't afford ongoing counseling help. And so in a sense, becomes an incredible way that the body of Christ pulls all its parts together to help the injured part, to help be a message of hope to those who are hurting and to those who are even outside of the body of Christ. The minute we draw them in, they get connected to the life blood of Christ. This really excites me, as I really believe that the church is the most incredible vehicle of hope to the broken, the lost, and the hurting. But now is the time to invest. Now is the time to invest in the spectrum of counseling resources for self-care, community care, and pastoral care. This is the way we impact people's emotional and spiritual crisis. The time is now. I hope this has been helpful. Take care and God bless.